Right now, it's come to my attention that my videos are getting, like, really freaking long. I had meant to make this channel to be very concise and have very short videos that aren't longer than 10 minutes or even longer than 8 minutes for that matter. So, let's get back to what we're, our roots. We're gonna make more focused kind of videos. IEMs, more focused on games. I've been diving too much into, like, how good they are at music, which isn't the focus of my channel. That's the focus of other channels. We're here to, like, take those same IEMs that those other channels are looking at and see if they're any good for gaming. So, let's get started today with the Simgot EM2 Roltion. See, that's the name of them. So, that being said, let's get started. Now, of course, these were sent out to me for review, but this won't affect my review in any way, shape, or form. Everything you're going to hear here is going to be my own personal opinion, and like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be more of a gaming-focused review, where I'll touch on audio file aspects, and I'll tell you how that'll affect its performance in game. So, with that being said, let's get started.
Now here we have the box with a classic waifu. Yes, this still counts, and if we open the box, we'll find some very nice packaging, including a letter that contains a card of our waifu. And under it is the stuff we're going to talk about, which are the IEMs themselves, the cable, a leathery carrying case, which is actually kind of nice, and on the back there's some writing which says, "Salute to art and science." Strange, but okay. Well, inside the box, you're actually going to find two different sets of ear tips, which have different size holes, which will affect the sound, which we'll get into later. Now, we also got this really neat pin with a really cool crest that's found also on the Simgot box. But aside from that, we of course get some paperwork, which also includes our letter and our waifu. Starting with the cable, this is actually a very nicely, tightly braided cable, so I'm not going to expect anything to untangle, and it feels quite durable. I mean, just look at this thing. It's just so nice. On one end is a 3.5mm jack, which is very solidly built, but for some reason has some protection on it, but we're going in raw. Moving up to the splitter, it's a pretty simple one, but nothing wrong with that, as it looks pretty okay, and the cable is still thick after the split. Now, I do get a chin slider, but it does slide around pretty easily, and while it does work, I would have preferred it to be a little bit, less slidey. Meanwhile, at the end, we of course get ear hooks with 2-pin connectors. Now, moving on to the IEMs themselves, they're mostly made of plastic and metal, with like the little metal details on the outside, and on the inside is mostly plastic. This overall plasticky build will help keep the IEMs very light, however, to some it may feel a little bit cheap due to the lightness. Anyway, moving on, of course, on the top we have the 2-pin connectors, and as for the nozzles, they are made of metal, and of course on the inside there are grills to keep your earwax out.
Now, for those of you who are curious, here's how they look like on my head. They're not too big, they don't stick out too far, they fit quite nicely in the ear and kind of work with the form of my ear, honestly. So honestly, they look pretty okay in here. Actual fitment and comfort's pretty good. Fitment, to get to that comfort, is a little finicky at times because the hooks in these things are very aggressively hooked, which can pose a bit of a problem when you're trying to get the perfect fit. Though this is more of a problem if you're using the ear tips with a larger hole. These are the smaller holed silicone tips, and these ones it's much easier to find the perfect fit and just be on your way and be comfortable. And these things are super light, so while you will feel them like plugging up your ears, the weight of them is so light, it's just very comfortable. I can wear these for hours on end. Now, if you're going to be using the ear tips that have a larger hole, finding the perfect fit for the right seal is definitely going to be a lot more difficult from what I've noticed. So that's unfortunate, because especially if you're going for the sound that those will give, which I'll explain a little bit later. But if you're going to be using the regular hold tips, these are pretty standard size holes. Fitment, easy to find, easy to get there. Comfort, pretty good. Fit, looks, not bad. Alright, now when it comes to the sound of these guys, they are essentially more mid to high focused, but still give you some bass, particularly in the lower bass regions, where they're going to have like a good reach into the sub bass, so you get a good rumbly, boomier bass. Not a very punchy bass, so there's definitely more focus on like the lower bass versus like the upper and mid bass. And it is, I wouldn't say it's forward, but it's definitely got a presence, so it's not like a anemic bass by any means. But if you're more into like the mid bass, that more punchy kind of bass, it doesn't have the greatest impact. It's got more boom and rumble than punch. Now, moving into like the mids and the highs, that's where the main focus and the star of the show for these guys are. And these things are very detailed in those regions, like especially if you get to like the upper mids to the highs, that's where things really shine. The lower mids are just kind of okay. They kind of got that dip, probably from like the those upper bass regions, but they still try to push that area a bit. And I do think the mids in particular are more pushed forward, giving you a lot of detail and clarity in that range, and a lot of micro detail actually as we move into like the upper mids to highs. A lot of little sparkly bits, those little teensy beansy little details. It's very crispy sounding, and it comes off honestly very analytical without being like sterile sounding, like scientific kind of sound. And it's probably because like the bass helps keep things a little bit more exciting. So they're not boring by any means, even though the sound is a bit more on the analytical side. I guess it's not really like too analytical as much as like very detailed and crispy in sound. There is a downside to this though, as the highs do extend very far and give you all those little beautiful sounds, but because of the highest extension, with the way they handled it, sometimes it did get a little bit sharp at times, but it's nothing that hurt too bad, so it didn't get too sibilant. Surprisingly, it just got really sharp, and sometimes I think it didn't handle that too well. So the quality of the highs once it gets super high isn't the greatest, but anywhere below that it is still pretty damn good. Soundstage and imaging on these guys are overall pretty good. I'd say the, you know, in terms of like soundstage, it is for an IM, which is small, large and usual. Like for an IM, I found the sound to be quite large. It was like spacious. It got a good amount of air to it, especially if I used the ear tips that had like a larger opening. It just gave a bit more air in between like all the sounds that were happening. Though I actually preferred the smaller tips because the sound itself is already spacious in of itself, and with the tips that have like smaller holes, the sound overall just felt tighter. I mean, at the sacrifice of a bit of that airiness, but I preferred the tighter sound because it helped bring out more of those details, which was helpful in games, honestly. And it also helped, like, you know, the smaller hole one also just made the bass feel tighter as well. It just was a nicer bass. It was a stronger emphasis from the bass with the smaller holes. Now, in translation to gaming, when it comes to competitive gaming, these things did a pretty good job, because with the soundstage, it's definitely a bit more wide than it is long, but it's still fairly round, and it was pretty accurate with the imaging, giving you a pretty good idea of where everything was. I wouldn't say they were like pinpoint, but they were getting close to pinpoint, so that's really good, because you can definitely find where things are from like a distance as well as when things get close up. However, the EM2s did struggle on like the vertical department, so they were more accurate in terms of like the horizontal plane. Once things started like going into like the more vertical plane, like, you know, listening for footsteps above you, these things didn't give you the greatest sense of that, unfortunately. So the accuracy isn't perfect if you're considering that. If you're playing games that where that matters a lot, where you need to know if things are above you or below you, these things don't do the greatest job at that. But if that's less of a concern and the elevation isn't like too crazy up and down, then I think you're gonna be fine, because when it comes to the horizontal plane, I'd found the imaging to be pretty damn good for like competitive shooters. Now, surprisingly, when it comes to non-competitive games, like more worldly, atmospheric, open worldish kind of games, these things do a pretty good job. And when it comes to like earbuds with this kind of sound profile, where there's more of a, like a mid to high focus, typically they are not the greatest at this kind of like category, just because of like the sound that they have not giving you the greatest sense of the size of the world. But what these things do is, because they give you a lot of those details, you know, which is great, you get the mid and high range giving you all those like lovely details occurring in the world, to give you a sense of that size of the world and give more body to the sound. These things, they give you that because they have a lot of that lower bass region, and I found that to be very important to give you that sense of size of the world when you're actually exploring that large open world environment. So when it comes to non-competitive games, I think these things did a pretty good job. Are there better options? Yeah, but considering what they got, these things still do a pretty damn good job. You get all the lovely details and sounds occurring within the world, of the wind, the grass, the creatures, but you still get like that oomph at the lower end to make the world still feel large and not very small. Now, the Simgot EM2s are priced at $100, and this is a very competitive range where it's going to be compared to a lot of things, including things that are like cheaper than it, like the Moondrop Arias. And, you know, compared, you know, I know some people are going to look at the Moondrop Arias versus these, because those are like bang for your buck and do good at everything kind of earbuds. They're the IMs to go to at that range. I think the Moondrop Arias are definitely going to be better as a choice for less competitive games compared to these guys, but if you're going to be playing more competitive games, I think the Moondrop Arias aren't quite as good as the EM2s, just because of how the sound profiles are. The Moondrop Arias are more relaxed. They're designed more for chilling out, I guess. So like when it comes to other earbuds and IMs within this range, I think a lot of people would probably look at like the P1 Maxes or like the Soundnotes Yoko. Regarding the sounds of those things just kind of do okay in their departments in either kind of gaming situations, whereas the EM2s do much better in competitive shooters than those two, considering like the sound profile and the details we're getting out of these. These things are actually more detailed than the P1 Maxes, which I found to be also pretty detailed and very clear. Both of them doing a pretty good job at that, though I do think the Simgots have a higher chance of getting sharp compared to the P1 Maxes, unfortunately. So, you know, there are trade-offs, of course. Vertically, they're all not great at it. At the vertical plane, they're all pretty much better at doing like the horizontal plane, though in terms of like ranking for like competitive games, I would say the EM2s are higher than the P1 Maxes, which are then also higher than the Soundnotes Yoko. The Soundnotes Yoko I prefer more for music than games, honestly. Now, the IMs most similar in sound to these that I can think of that I've used are probably the Tin Hi-Fi T3 Pluses. They're very similar in sound, where they're more mid to high focus and with a bass region that is more rumbly and deep than it is like punchy. But these things are basically like the upgraded, much better detailed versions of the T3 Pluses. So if you're someone who have the T3 Pluses and you're like, man, I like the T3 Pluses, but I want a better version of them with a better bass, more details, more mids, you know, just everything upgraded a bit, these are to go too. So, you know, just take the T3 Pluses, all things that are good about it, and make it better, except for vertical room when it comes to like imaging and soundstage. Both of them aren't great at that vertical plane, so you won't get that upgrade. You'll get the horizontal plane upgrade. These things are wider than them, but you know, when it comes to vertical, not great. So that's basically what I got today. So competitive games, these things are great unless, you know, vertical stuff is concerned. It's better horizontally. Vertical, you know, there's still vertical send. I'm just saying it's not the greatest. Non-competitive games, surprisingly, does a pretty good job. But yeah, competitive games, non-competitive games, these things do a pretty good job at their price point, and I do think a lot of people would enjoy it. There are, you know, better choices if you're more focused on one versus the other, but all things considered, from what I've just mentioned earlier, maybe this is for you. Maybe this is the kind of playstyle that you're going to go for. So, if that being said, if you do want to buy these, I will leave a link down in the description. And I don't know if I get a kickback from that. I might, but you know, links down there in case you do want to buy them. And that's pretty much all I have for today. So, with that being said, if this video did help you out with your buying decision, like the video, some for more content you want to post next. And you know, if I'm talking too fast, that's too bad, because that's where we're going back to. Because I usually talk very, very fast in my other videos, because I just want to get these videos out real quick, because our attention spans are very short. So in my next videos, I'll probably reiterate on the fact that I'm going to be going faster, making shorter videos for people to digest very quickly, because life is short, we're short on time, you're short on time, your attention span is also very short, and so is mine. So with that being said, I'll see you guys next time.